Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey show. We have a special guest, and I'm going to let Joey introduce her tonight. Joey, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. So I'm really excited about this guest. I like whenever I see people that are builders, that are doing something to try to actually fix our political problems instead of just complain about them. Our guest, she's the founder and CEO of the new Patriot Foundation, and they're doing a lot of great work to restore the conservative movement within the Republican Party. And her name is Camille MacKenzie. So, how you doing tonight? First, before I dive into the first question.
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you
No
for
problem.
coming on.
So, what made you start a political organization? That's kind of a big question, but what's kind of the background? What prompted you to get active?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question that I can sum up in a shorter story for sure. Primarily, it was seeing what happened during the 2024 primary. I was actually a big DeSantis supporter. I really wanted somebody that was a constitutional conservative to be able to take over an office. I feel like he's very fiscally responsible based on his track record in Florida, and felt like he was somebody who actually had the temerity to take on what was needed in the federal government to really put us on the right path. And then found myself incredibly disappointed that everybody, of course, felt like they bought into what I think is a lie, that Trump won the 2020 election. I don't agree with that. I don't think there's evidence to support that. But of course, that's what really kind of pushed him over the edge, that and the court cases that were against him. And that was unfortunate because I feel like the times that we're currently in really called for somebody like Ron DeSantis to come in and really clean up a lot of what's happening in Washington. I think he would have put all of his very detailed and meticulous work ethic into play. And so that kind of thing really just got me thinking about what could we do more of in order to get more governors, more municipalities supporting constitutional conservatives like DeSantis, like Reagan. I feel like that's kind of gone missing from the Republican Party since Trump was elected in 2016. And so the organization was really founded between me and a group of friends that I had met through Twitter, or X as it's now called, who also felt the same way. They felt very displaced in the current political landscape and felt like there was something more that we could be doing, more that we could do to tackle voter apathy, which is a really big problem where a lot of people are not even aware when municipal elections are going on in their local community. They don't understand, kind of the schedule of what occurs with those elections. Legislation is something that's kind of a behemoth for them to sort of tackle when they've got everyday lives going on, jobs, kids, family, things like that. But it's still something important to do. Civic duty is important. And so we felt like starting an organization that could tackle some of those issues was the way to go.
That's interesting that, you talked about DeSantis, because many people that I, have spoken to as well felt that he would have been the better candidate. But Trump is a phenomenon, right? And it caught the attention of the voters. And obviously that's what matters in the end, right? The voters make the choice. How do you perceive, though, his presidency would have been different? Because everybody to a man says that what he does in Florida is great. Why don't you think that caught on? Because no conservative denies how great Florida is run, yet they couldn't go beyond and see it for the country.
I think a lot of it had to do with some personality. Was a little bit different. Obviously, Trump kind of encompasses that entertainment value that I think voters have now kind of come to expect from politicians, rather than the serious tone that I think we're used to from the past. I think a lot of that played into it, as well as this myth that, Trump was this huge winner in 2020, and they felt like he had been robbed of a second term. I think it wouldn't have necessarily just been DeSantis. I think if there had been anybody else, if Rand Paul had gotten back in the race again, or Thomas Massie had run, both very great constitutional conservatives, both very popular. But I think it wouldn't have made a difference with the times that we're in, especially coming off of COVID and coming with, Joe Biden. I think just a lot of people really wanted to just see a continuation of something that they felt like they missed out on. So I don't think there was much that really could have been done different. I mean, DeSantis ran a really great campaign. Maybe not the messaging so much. I think he could have differentiated himself a lot more than the show that Trump kind of puts on and some of what people term as his incompetency. But he, went out there and really like pounded the pavement. He was out there door knocking and just out there every day, meeting with voters, doing town halls, he did the full Grassley. I mean, he really put his heart and soul into some of that. And I just think, unfortunately, that no matter how much effort he put into it, no matter what the message was, again, I think people were looking for that entertainment factor. And I think they were truly just looking to see Trump get a second term. I just think that they felt he was robbed and they wanted to see that happen again.
So, constitutionally, it's Trump's last term.
Yes.
Do you think DeSantis runs again? And, sometimes people just don't gravitate to a personality. Do you think he has it within him to kind of get the nomination come 28?
I would like to hope that he would. I would like to think in that time frame with what we have seen come out of this administration, where it has bordered on that real incompetency factor, where I don't think as much of that was seen his first term due to the seriousness of the cabinet members that surrounded him at the time, like Mike Pence. I think some of that was missing this time. Unfortunately for me, my personal prediction is that we will see a Democrat take office in 2028.
Mercy.
I just think, unfortunately, that I hope I'm wrong. I hope my prediction is wrong. But I feel like with the way that this presidency has gone, especially even just today, the disappointment that a lot of people have seen and felt with the Epstein list, feeling like it's been covered up, that there's just more kind of government corruption with that. I think, though, with that coupled with the tariffs, the way the economy has gone, it's been very erratic. It's caused a lot of people a lot of stress. There's a lot of jobs that have been lost, especially in the tech sector. And with all the tariffs coming in and coming out, we can't really land on a policy with that. I don't see that kind of thing getting any better over the next 3.5 years. And I honestly think at that point, one, it'll be DeSantis up against somebody like Vance, who obviously feel like he is owed getting to run, having been vice president. I personally would like to see him wait until maybe 2032 to have really like had the field cleared out. We'll have moved away from MAGA a little bit further in that time. There will be some more distance from us being able to look back on Donald Trump's presidency and really see where things went right, where things went wrong. But I think for him, it would be a challenge, I think, to go up against what will be the country's sentiment by that time towards a Republican, no matter how good that Republican might be. I fear that it will probably be somebody like a Newsom or an AOC, to be honest.
Mercy, well, AOC presidency.
I really hope I'm wrong.
That's not the kind of thing you tell me like a couple hours before I go to bed. That'll give me nightmares.
Right.
But so switching gears a little bit. So obviously we see the problem, right? I think anyone who's like a sensible kind of, right-wing person, right? Like, we see the problems, we see the daunting task, but you've started an organization. So what do you see as the path towards getting the conservative movement back on track, right? How do we go about doing that?
I think a lot of that comes from educating the electorate. Too often the term conservative has been thrown around, but muddied the waters with the populist message that has been very prevalent throughout this particular administration, both this term and last time that he was in office. And I think too often a lot of people do not have like a really good, strong, clear understanding of what conservatism means. I think they lack like a real fundamental understanding of the principle that is behind that, the fact that it's built on a very strong traditional base of a lot of things that have run through this country for, centuries, honestly, since our founding, that really backs up our constitutional rights, really aims to protect that. and then really focuses in on being able to provide, things with communities that are better for them in relation to education, to fiscal responsibility. And so I think a lot of what our organization really wants to focus on is just being able to mobilize that local conservative, turn them into an activist, which we don't often see on the right? That's usually a left type of thing. They've got tons of nonprofits that are out there. I mean, we see the No Kings protest. I mean, that wasn't just one group. That was a number of groups that came together and were able to put that on and bring all these people together. They just tend to be a lot more activism driven than the right does. And so I'd really like to see more conservatives who are very intelligent. I've seen a lot of people in our particular group, our members, who are very educated on American history, on civic education, really be able to be what I tell them to often do is be good stewards in their community, reach out to voters that maybe are a little less informed on that kind of thing, and really get out there and educate them more, not only on elections that are coming up that they might not be aware of, on legislation that's happening that might affect them in their day-to-day lives, but just better understanding civics as a whole, American history as a whole. So that kind of thing is what we are focused on at New Patriot. We actually have a national education committee that we're putting together a monthly podcast that is available obviously to the public, but it was a way to be able to bring different conservative voices together in either like a roundtable or a panel or just a discussion about different, conservative sources of information, talking about American history, civic education, current political events, but all through a conservative lens. And I feel like they've not often gotten that. We see Con Inc., conservative media as it used to be, where a lot of people would have looked to Rush Limbaugh or even Charles Krauthammer. They would have looked to somebody like that for like a voice of reason. And I don't feel like we're getting that as much anymore. Like with the Daily Wire and like Ben Shapiro in particular, and, a couple of these other influencers that are on, all the social media channels, they purport to use the word conservative, but they don't actually espouse what that actually means. I think they've muddied the waters, and that's made it incredibly confusing to people. And so I think we really need to get back to educating people on what that looks like, why the model in Florida has worked, that is conservative like policies in action. And it's actually successful. They've skyrocketed to be one of the top states for education. They've got a surplus in their budget, so many things that work well when we actually put conservative principles into practice. And so I think being able to take that same message and put it in an easy to understand format and bringing it to the general public, I think that will help a lot with getting people to really better understand what's going on and get them more involved in their communities when they realize that these are actual actionable steps that I can take as a citizen that are easy to do in my own community. I don't even have to go far. I can go right down the street to City Hall and I can really make a difference. I think that will be one of the really good things that comes out of this organization, is being able to mobilize people in that way.
As you look at the threats that, for the most part are on the radar that come from the left, but what about even within, quote unquote, the conservative movement? And here in the Gio and Joey show, sometimes we worry about Christian nationalism and some of what they're calling now the woke right. What are some of the threats you see from within, what they would call the right, the lean right side?
Yeah, unfortunately for that, I feel like it's taken on kind of an ominous tone. Unfortunately, we've reached that peak where we've gotten to that horseshoe effect where the right on that extreme side is mirroring the extreme left. So we saw during like the 2020 riots, a lot happening with Antifa. All the destruction that they put out there, the threats that they made, they really put people in a really uncomfortable position with that. And unfortunately, some on the right have taken to adopting some of those tactics. I've seen a lot of doxing online just because somebody may hold a different political view, but they operate within the same political party. So these are people who are supposed to share the same party platform and values, and yet they may have a difference in opinion of who would you have wanted to run for president. That's a very personal opinion to people, and something that everybody as an American has a right to decide for themselves who they wanted to vote for. Nobody should have to feel punished for that. Even if we're on the conservative side, and therefore, liberalism to us is maybe something that now has become like a very big dichotomy. That doesn't mean, though, that somebody should be threatened for holding a different political view. These are still people that are supposed to be our neighbors, they're fellow citizens. They're still people that come together, like in Texas with this flooding in the hill country. People still come together and want to help their neighbors. They don't stop first and ask, what's your political background? What's your political philosophy? Oh, I can't help you if you don't align with mine. We never do things like that. We're just neighbors. And I feel like people, both on the right and on the left, really need to get away from this very tribal attitude that people have towards one another and just lower the temperature quite a bit. Politics is important. It affects all of us. You can't really get away from it, even from the people who are like, I'm not a politics person.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, politics happens whether you want to be or not. It's all around you. But we definitely don't have to treat it in a way that's become this sort of blood sport where everything is my team, your team.
Survival of the fittest.
Right. They've got these tribes then and these different factions, and people are sort of competing with one another for the engagement that they get online. So I think they think that if they sort of like create this clickbait headline, if they really try to attack others for their viewpoints, that somehow will get them more notoriety, more notice. And unfortunately, some of that, in my opinion, has come from our president. He regularly makes that a key part of his administration is the messaging he puts out, insults that he makes to other people. And I think through that, as much as we want to like keep that kind of separate from our day-to-day lives up in the executive branch, that does set a tone for your party as a whole. And so I think, I'm sorry, there's some.
No worries.
I think that kind of thing just really invites that sort of atmosphere. And I think that's something that the woke right has then really kind of grabbed onto.
Yeah,
and
been emboldened.
Yeah, exactly. Been emboldened. Great word for that.
You mentioned I'll let you go here real quick, Joey. You mentioned the flooding, right? And Joey told me that you helped mobilize people in what way to kind of help that situation?
Well, honestly, we just put together a list of resources that everybody could go to. That was a combination of search and rescue websites, as well as some churches that were in the area that were gathering supplies, and then a couple local businesses that were also taking in monetary donations as well as supplies. And then even ones for displaced pets, because we often kind of forget that a lot of animals then sometimes get separated from their families, or they might get stranded. So I did make sure to include some things like that as well. So whatever we can do to highlight different organizations that are doing some good in a community to help, especially in an effort like that. I mean, those poor girls at the Camp Mystic that were all gone missing. And of course, that's every parent's worst fear, that you've sent your child off to camp and then a disaster happens like this and you don't know where to find them and other information. So I even included a GoFundMe where people are raising money to pay for therapy for the girls that were found because of this very traumatizing, effect of not only being in the flood, but knowing that so many of their fellow campers, had gone missing. That's obviously something that will impact them, probably throughout their life. And so I think that's great that people are raising money even for that very specific purpose. So really, we tried to just put together different resources for that so that people could be informed of some reputable places to go that they could donate.
Just plug it. Where can they find that list, and where can they find all these resources?
Yeah, great. You can certainly go to any of our social media pages. X is our primary place. So you can find us at newpatriot_HQ. And it's one of our most recent posts that are on there. You can also search for us at New Patriot Foundation on Facebook. And we also have the same resources listed there as well.
Thank you very much for that effort. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just love that you guys are doing that. And one of the things that's been, like, it's a sad day that this is now a litmus test for me, but like with how many people on social media, like I remember, like I was just a kid at 9/11, but like I remember 9/12, and there were no Republicans or Democrats on 9/12, right? It was just like there was Los Angeles, right? American bumper stickers, right? Like, and that kind of united us. But it seems like now, whenever there's a tragedy, it's a Republican state. So, I'm sure the Republican governor's to blame. Or it's California, so I'm sure it's Newsom's fault. But like, we really just need to get back to, and I like that you guys are doing that. It just, no, let's just care about the victims. It doesn't matter who they voted for. They're Americans.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, what difference does it make? I mean, there
Hmm.
was a natural disaster. Nobody could have stopped it. It's nobody's fault that it happened. Instead, let's just get people out there looking for people, sending out search and rescue, whatever we can do to find those people and bring them home and get them home safe. I mean, that's all that honestly matters when something like that happens.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no doubt.
Mhm.
So you mentioned the Con Inc., right? The kind of conservative media establishment, and like, I think there's varying degrees of it, right? Like, I would say like there's a grifter scale, and there's certain people that are more on one side, where there's certain people on the other side, like Ben Shapiro, right? Like, I do think he still believes conservative things like free markets, and but I think, there's one of these things where, in order to maintain an audience, one of the things that's helpful about us, like, being small, is we can just say what we want. Like, we don't, like, people are mad, they're mad. But when you have that audience, you want to keep it. And
Hmm.
so obviously you guys are, starting this work of just training people, educating people on what conservatism is. But this dichotomy that you laid out, I agree with you, right? Conservatism versus populism. But to someone who maybe, they're just a kind of a political, they're just apathetic
Newbie.
about political things. Maybe they vote, maybe they don't. What would you say is conservatism, and how does it compare to populism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll kind of lay out what populism is first. It's it's honestly not really anything. They don't have like a solid foundation of principles for anything that they believe in for any one thing. It's sort of what it is in the name. It's whatever's popular at the time. It's whatever's trending at the time. So they kind of go with wherever the wind blows, which leaves it open to uncertainty. It leads to policies being done and then being undone in the same week, as we've seen with the Trump administration, because as soon as they get wind of this might not be popular, okay, well, then I need to change what I'm doing. You think sometimes that sounds good, like, well, let's make a quick pivot. But when you're
Mm.
working off of something that's basically built on sand, there's nowhere for it to go except to keep being pulled down. Whereas when you're building something off of conservatism, because they're done on very timeless principles like fiscal responsibility and upholding the Constitution and believing in 2A rights, there's things to actually stand on. So being a conservative doesn't mean collectivist thought. It doesn't mean being a hive mind. It doesn't mean being a monolith. Instead, it
Hmm.
means everybody's kind of working off the same core values that mean something to us, that kind of holds us together as a group. And then within that, you can pick and choose different things that you want to have your opinions on. You may believe more strongly in the fiscal responsibility aspect and maybe less so in another area. Or maybe you're really into pro-life, which everybody is, that's a conservative, but maybe you put a much stronger emphasis on 2A or something.
Hmm.
It enables you to have this sort of strong foundation to work from, that then you're able to better understand for yourself what's a checklist of items that this legislation should hold true to, because we know that if we stick with these principles, that they're not going to lead us wrong. And with populism, you're just kind of left at the whims of whoever it is that may be in charge and setting those policies, and really they're just working off of things that sound good. They're not anything that's built off of anything steady and strong. They're just going with wherever they feel like going, and therefore it's just subject to change at any given moment, which leaves the American people with just that mass uncertainty, and then usually leads to catastrophe at the end, because you're just kind of all over the place. And so really that's how I've viewed what's happened with the Republican Party. It used to have a much more steady hand. Doesn't matter who the politician was. If you liked George W. Bush, it's not a personal thing. It doesn't matter the person. But it used to be that they had a very strong platform that was very pro-life, very fiscally responsible, believed in liberty, wanted limited government, the list goes on and on. Now, today, so much of that has been struck from the Republican Party platform. They did away with a lot of the pro-life language. So it makes it hard when you don't have those things to stand off of, that then when you make policies for things, it leaves too much open to interpretation, and you're left with no like real steady ground with which to start from to where you can build off of that to make something last. And so that's really what I would say personally is what that difference is there of why things seem so chaotic right now is because they're not built off of any principle.
You know, being in my line of work, I'm a minister, the human nature, right? People love hey, what have you done for me lately? How do we go about educating the people and I know that's what your foundation or your group does, but what are other ways we can go about doing it, like perhaps me, Joey, and others, to think long term? Because, I mean, we want to make the nation last, yet I could understand that people want, give me now, right? Forget about tomorrow. I'm living today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's embracing some more of that. Again, looking at those conservative principles, there's only 7 of them. So they're really easy to go off of and understand what that is. I think if you start with that and then use that as sort of a checklist to determine, when somebody's proposing legislation or you have somebody that's running for office, do they meet that criteria? And those 7 principles are individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. And I think even now today, if it's something that you're not yet, like a political junkie, like some of us might be, and you're just, either you just turned 18. And so you're really trying to figure out like, where do I fit into the political landscape? What does that look like for me? Or maybe you're somebody that's coming to realize that how you might have voted in the past, you might, as you get older, more and more people start recognizing that they're more conservative. So just knowing what those are and using that as your signpost for figuring out when somebody's running for office, does that person live by those principles? If they've been in office before as an incumbent, does their track record align with those items? Can I check them off my list, the different pieces of legislation that they've, supported or that they've, put forth in front of a committee? Did they meet those different avenues of what the principles are? If they do not, then that is somebody that you should maybe think again about supporting that person. Because the more that we compromise on those principles and the more that we just say, well, they're the lesser of 2 evils, maybe it's not so bad. How often has that honestly worked out for us? It's not been great. We usually wind up with terrible primary candidates. And so a lot of people need to understand that oftentimes the primary is almost more important than the general, because that's your chance for within your party to pick people that they give you a number of different choices that you can choose from. It's important for people to debate. It's important for people to hear your ideas and be able to compare them against the next person and see where do they stand on these different principles. Do they align with what I believe in? Who is the closest to meeting that? Given that, most people won't be 100%, that would be pretty unlikely. But if at least you could get somebody that's 60, 70, 80%, who seems like to be a very good person, they're morally sound, and they have a good track record of if they've been an incumbent or if they're fairly new, what's their background? Do they have something that's relevant to government? Have they contributed to their community? Have they been somebody who's been a pillar in that community, that they've gone out, helped, donated? Something along those lines to indicate that they care about you and people that are around you in your community. Do they live in your district? Oftentimes we even get representatives that don't actually live in the district that they port to support and that they want to run in. That's important that they do, because if not, they won't truly understand what's happening around you and why it matters to you. So I would say those are all things that you can do now, even without New Patriot being around. Those are things that you can do for yourself, that those are fairly easy to look up and learn and be able to just take that through that lens of those principles and be able to determine, is this legislation something that I should support or oppose? If I oppose that, how can I get in touch with my legislator to let them know that? They usually have their numbers, they have staffers' information. They will take your call, they will take your letter, they will take your email. It's important to reach out to them, because if we don't, that representative has no idea how their constituents feel about something. How would you, if you were in that representative's place and you didn't hear from your constituents because they weren't really civically involved, how would you know what's important to someone or isn't important to someone? You need to be able to hear from people. And so you're only going to hear from the ones who actually make the effort. So you're going to get out of politics what you put in. You're going to get out of your community what you put in. So it matters to make that effort even now, even with being fairly new to politics, or you're just somebody that never wasn't that involved before, these are very easy things that you can do to get involved that would make a huge difference.
And I'm glad you are highlighting that, because a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too earlier on in my life, you just worry about the presidential election every 4 years. But there's a lot that's going on, right? Congress people every 2 years, senators every 6 years, and there's a cycle of that, and you can make a difference. My wife, this past year, not even past year, a couple of months ago, we wrote our letter to our senators here in Oklahoma over a particular issue. And so, yes, get involved at any level you feel comfortable, because it makes a difference. It's, that butterfly effect, right? One little, or that rock in the lake, one little ripple can have ramifications. Off air, though, we were talking about two different subjects, Social Security. At the beginning of this, you brought up the Epstein list. And I want to bring that up because there was a message with Bondi, Patel, and Boningo or Bongio, what's his name? I forget. What?
Bongino, Dan Bongino.
Yeah, Bongino, right? Where they were gung-ho about releasing the list. And now there is no list. Like, between one extreme to the other, there's truth lies in the middle. What do you think happened there?
I will just say this before we get your answer. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and I want to get your thoughts on this too. She said, no, listen, I'm not a conspiracy person, so I'm perfectly willing to admit that maybe the hype was whatever. I don't know the facts. But Pam Bondi said earlier, when everyone was asking about it, she said, as Attorney General, I've seen the list, and now the administration says there's no list. So she was either lying then, or she's lying now. And I don't know your thoughts, but I don't think the Attorney General should be the Attorney General if they're going to lie to the American people that blatantly. But what's your thoughts on the situation?
No, I do not agree that anybody that's in that kind of position, a cabinet position like that, or anybody that's holding an office to that level, no, I don't think they should ever lie to the American people. I think it's wrong that has become a regular practice for press secretaries. I don't think that's correct, that people should do that and be able to manipulate something because they're worried about a PR nightmare on their hands. I don't think that's right. And the only reason that they're having to backtrack on something like that, and anytime anybody has to do that in life, is because somebody lied somewhere. And now you're having to change your story, and you're having to cover that up, or you're having to figure out how to work your way out of a certain situation. And so unfortunately for them, I think they either potentially went in assuming that there was something that was there and made a big to-do of it before they actually saw the information. And then when they did, they of course had to backtrack on what they said. Or unfortunately, it is a cover-up of some kind. You don't say the words, there's an Epstein list, and then now Carolyn Leavitt, the press secretary, comes out and says, list means everything on someone's desk. I mean, come on. We all are Americans here. We all understand the English language. We know that when you're referring to the Epstein list, that is a very specific reference to something. That is not
the
just
entire file.
Exactly. It's not some colloquial term to just mean everything that's on your desk, whether it's Epstein or not. That is not what that refers to. So I think personally that they are covering up some information. That's obviously what everybody has thought for years. Unfortunately, a number of people put their trust into this administration because they made a big deal out of putting out these binders to all these influencers sharing supposed information when it turned out to be things that were already publicly available that anybody could see. So it was not really any new information. But then on top of that, to continue to obfuscate on the issue, and then now to have just declared that all of these things are just a moot point, that we don't need to know any more information, that case closed, everything's on the up and up, there was nothing to see here. I don't think that's right. I don't think that there was just nothing of significance. I don't think that you put Jeffrey Epstein in prison. I don't think you put Maxwell in prison for nothing.
And keep her there.
There's a reason. Exactly.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because, Trump and his administration and these guys, Bondi, Patel, Bongino, they rode that wave, right? Oh, we're gonna clean the sewer, drain the swamp and stuff. And yet, you and us, right? We call people to be responsible. They thought they were going to do that. So when we meet that kind of disappointment, what's your message to people to stay the course?
I would say continue to look at firsthand sources, not secondhand sources. That's important. We've lost a lot of that where we just trust third-party sources. We now trust influencers to be the news. And unfortunately, oftentimes they're just making things up, or they only get this information secondhand, right? And they don't verify that information. So always verify for yourself first. Look to people that are reputable news sources. I know that seems harder and harder to find. And oftentimes we revert back to the tribalism. If somebody that's a leftist, supposedly leaning publication, they couldn't possibly be telling the truth. So only my side tells the truth, when oftentimes our own side is sometimes lying to us as well. So I think it's just knowing and using common sense to say when something doesn't seem right and things aren't adding up, that people are telling you one story and then suddenly it's something different. There's definitely something going on. It doesn't mean that we'll ever necessarily get to know the full truth for something, because unfortunately we're not all privy to some of the information that the government may have that we don't have access to. But that's certainly why FOIA requests exist, for freedom of information. Those kind of things exist for a reason, so that people can't typically hide information like that. So I know a number of people over the years for various different topics have tried to use FOIA requests in order to get that information, because they feel that it's important for the American people to know what the truth is. Unfortunately, in this instance, I don't know if we ever will. Unfortunately, it's been so politicized, and everybody's kind of dug in onto the particular theory of what did or did not happen and who or who not, who wasn't involved. Unfortunately, I don't know if we'll ever know what that is, but I definitely would not take just what the government feeds you at the podium as just the God's honest truth.
And if there ever were a list, I got news for people: the list doesn't exist anymore. If they were going to go through all this to cover it up, right, the easiest thing is just get rid of the list. And so my guess is God's judgment is perfect, and I think people that did things to children or whatever, they will get their comeuppance, but I don't think that they're all going to get their earthly justice.
Something that crossed my mind today when I heard about, all this nonsense about the Epstein, I was like, supposedly, right, the theory was that Epstein had a list and that he blackmails these individuals to do what he wanted or to get money, whatever. So quickly through my mind, and I just throw this for discussion, I was like, what about if the Trump administration is using the list in reverse, right? We won't release this, so you toe the party line or whatever, or your government. Because we see a lot of governments acquiescing to Trump's demands, and even people in our own government. I don't know, just threw that out there. In this day and age, I don't put anything past anybody.
You really can't. I mean, unfortunately, they've eroded trust more and more, and it's their own fault. It's the government's fault for engaging in that kind of behavior with the American people, constantly having to backtrack or lie, or because they don't like what the public sentiment is and they don't want to be disliked. They quickly change the narrative, or they've got public relations people who are out there just trying to, coalesce around a certain narrative. And unfortunately, I think once you've done that, trust is very hard to earn back. And unfortunately, they do not do anything on a daily basis to even attempt to earn it back. And I think that'll be quite a long road before we ever get there again. Doesn't mean anybody will ever trust a politician. 100%. I would never encourage anybody to do so, especially with somebody that you do not know personally and you couldn't personally vouch for them. But we certainly should at least get to some kind of middle again, to where people decorum. Can at least rely some more on what news media used to be. They used to be those people who would fight for the American people getting that truth. They want to expose things that the government were doing to cover things up. And unfortunately, in the last decade or so, we've really gotten away from that, and it's become more about the money than it is about the truth. And it's really sad that we've gotten to that state in this country.
I'm 52 years old, so I'm a lot older than Joey. But I remember back when politicians, right? The joke was when politicians were lying to you, they were like, oh, we can't, release its national security. Now they don't even use that. They just lie to our faces.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately they know that they can get away with it now because unfortunately there's that voter apathy again, where a lot of people only pay attention to the few things in the headlines. And if it's on your side, you seem to just accept it as fact. And if it's not on your side, that's the one time you question it, when really we should question it always. And yeah, unfortunately, we've now kind of bred that sort of atmosphere.
Yeah. Switch. Well, go ahead, Joey.
Well, I mean, I was going to. Is it on the same topic?
No, I was going to switch gears. Go ahead.
Okay, because I was going to switch. So, my question, kind of switching gears now, is the one big beautiful bill has just passed, right? It's glorious. I find it funny that they put the one there because I think they're trying to obscure the fact that it's literally the same initials as Biden's also terrible bill, Build Back Better. But I was listening to a podcast earlier by the Dispatch, right, called "The End of Fiscal Conservatism" or something. And like when I read this bill and when I look at all the nonsense that's in it, I can't help but think, well, that's true. But then on the other side, I'm like, well, fiscal conservatism better not be dead because that's kind of how the economy works. Like the country's screwed. So first of all, like, what was your thoughts on the bill? And then secondly, is as an organization, how are you kind of getting people to see that this bill is not in their interest, right? Particularly Republican voters, rural voters, even MAGA supporters. What's your kind of take on that?
Let me add a little section to that question, right? Because what you have to deal with, I already ran the numbers for my family based on the big, beautiful bill. I'm actually potentially going to get a refund where last year I paid an arm and a leg. So, it's like, but I understand long-term principles, right? So you battle that, right? It's good for me now, but it's bad for the future. So, yeah, with that in mind.
So I am obviously not a fan because it is not remotely fiscally responsible.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I've been, the way that we've been trying to educate people is just pulling out some of the information that we are able to find on it. And obviously it is a very large bill because we've seemed to, as a party, when we're not in power, we don't like omnibus bills. As soon as we're in power, then omnibus bills are okay and forget the standalone bills. We certainly should go back to that because nobody is able to truly understand what's going into something, especially the voters, to where they can fully get what's happening in their legislation and be able to call their representatives and let them know if they support or oppose something. Certainly for this bill, I don't support it for the fact that it adds $3 to $4 trillion with just that bill alone, but there's already $3 to $4 trillion, but then there's also 20 trillion that's already baked in. So by 2035, we'll be looking at approximately $57 trillion in debt in total, which is insane. I mean, it's already insane that we're at about 37 trillion as it stands today.
I remember when it crossed a trillion.
I mean, imagine that, how much we've added since that time. And that was approximately like the early 2000s or so that I think it had crossed a trillion. Yeah. So certainly that's, been a bigger and bigger problem with this government is there are people that run on in their campaigns, I am fiscally responsible, I am for limited government, I am for lowering the debt. Then they get into office and then suddenly there's insider trading going on. They're getting bought off by, lobbyists and special interests. And then you find them supporting things like this with the one big, beautiful bill. Unfortunately for a number of Americans, the bill for the bottom 10% of earners, they will actually see a decrease in their earnings by about $1,600 annually. And then you'll see people that are more in the upper middle class, anywhere from $150,000 on up, will see more tax breaks that are given to them, starting at about $5,000 to $6,000 per year. And then it just keeps going up from there to the richest earners in the country getting the highest tax breaks. And so really it was a bill that was designed to hurt, poorer Americans and, help the richer Americans. And really that's not what conservatives are supposed to be about. We're not supposed to be punishing people because they make less in income and rewarding those who are even more successful. Now, we certainly support people being successful in their own businesses and things like that. I don't see a problem with people being wealthy and having earned that success themselves. That's certainly something I encourage because I think that's great. They provide jobs and they really do help the economy. But that doesn't mean that then through all of these different programs that they've tacked on with putting more with the tax cuts and things like that, that's still at the end of the day, that is much less helpful to Americans. The national debt is our biggest crisis that we face as a country, and it knows no bounds. It affects every age group, every generation. It's detrimental to our country. It's really a national security risk. But now they've, hamstrung both the Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. We've got Gen Alpha coming up. It might even extend further, even beyond that. And it will take a lot of effort to fix that. And one of the primary ways that we could have started with that was cutting spending. And what that would mean would be dealing with Social Security.
Yes.
Social Security.
Good. I wanted to bring that up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Budget. Mm-hmm. So that's really a big component of what comprises our spending is through Social Security. And so really, if we had actually made inroads into tackling that, privatizing it, maybe even potentially phasing it out and letting people have those funds back for themselves to invest with how they wish to do so, that would make a huge difference right there. But unfortunately, as soon as you start trying to have that conversation about Social Security, the conversation gets shut down. It's a hot potato issue where we just throw it off to the next, administration, the next group of people, and everybody kicks the can down the road. And it's becoming to the point where we just can't do that anymore. Yeah. So unfortunately, the one big beautiful bill isn't going to help anybody at the end of the day. It only defunds Planned Parenthood for 1 year, not the 10 years that we were promised. SALT tax, that's your state and local tax for those that may not understand what that is. So it subsidizes red states for the high tax blue states where they choose to charge a lot more for their state taxes. They get breaks for that. So it was 10,000. Now the cap is 40,000. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a number of different things like that that are incredibly harmful to just people overall, that there is nothing beautiful about it. It was big, but there's nothing beautiful about that bill.
Hey, I want to fact check myself that the $1 trillion national debt actually happened back in 1981. I was around, but I must be remembering a different number than maybe 10 trillion or something. So. Yeah, because wow, it's been that long ago. Before we leave Social Security, because I don't know where Joey wants to go, talk about what we spoke about off air, how privatization will actually be better and why people don't like that because they misunderstand Social Security.
Yeah, so I've held a Twitter space on Social Security in the last couple of weeks. I'm actually holding another Twitter space this Thursday. So if you go to my profile, I have that.
Yeah, shout it out. At what time?
Yeah, so that's going to be Thursday at 4:30 Eastern. I'm bringing on a good friend of mine. His name is Aaron Levisay. He is a vet who lives up in South Dakota, who has done quite a lot of research on Social Security reform. On my prior space, I had Mac Latimer, who's a vet and a small business owner in Texas. I had Thomas Howes, who is the founder of the Reagan Caucus, and I had Aaron Levisay that were on my space, and we discussed what Social Security actually is and some different ideas that each of them had about privatizing it or potentially phasing it out. So what was brought up during the space that a lot of people didn't know, and this was very new information to some of them, was that you do not own your Social Security. A lot of people misunderstand that when you pay into it, they assume that not maybe necessarily that it's put into a separate account for yourself, but I think they think that the government's taking track of where that is. And, when I retire, then whatever I've paid in is what I'm getting back. Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works. It's a pay-as-you-go system. Those that are currently retired, their retirement funds come from those of us who are currently in the workforce. So me and you are currently paying for those who are retired and utilizing their Social Security benefits. Unfortunately, it used to be a program that worked maybe a little bit better when we had a different era, but we're in a different time now. Unfortunately, for every recipient of Social Security, it's only a 2-to-1 ratio. So every 2 of us that are in the workforce, we're paying for 1 retiree. I think the ratio used to be about 16-to-1. So we've obviously come to a very different time in our lives to where the workforce has shrunk significantly. A lot of that is from different factors. Some of it has to do with birth rates. We're having a lot less children than we are now, so naturally there's less people in the workforce. Also, people are living longer. At the time that Social Security had been in place during like the 1960s, people that were about the age of 60 had lived to about 80, but now they're living to 85. So as you can imagine, every year with medical advancements, the longer and longer we live, the more money you need in terms of benefits. And so with too many people retired and living longer with less and less people in the workforce, obviously there's an imbalance there in terms of the math and the ratio that happens. Some of that is, just from H-1Bs taking jobs of Americans. It's from AI replacing a lot of people. We've lost, I want to say, I think it's anywhere above 400 to 500,000 jobs just in the last 5 to 6 years in tech alone. A lot of that's gone overseas to India, and it's also gone through AI, has replaced a lot of people. So as you can imagine, as soon as you're starting to pull engineers out who make really good salaries, 6-figure salaries, when they're being pulled out and they now can't find jobs and more employment, that's even less people to be funding those who are currently on retirement. So it was actually stated and ruled on by the Supreme Court in Fleming v. Nestor back in the 60s that you do not own your retirement. Congress can choose to eliminate the program if they so choose. They can also decide what and where your funds go. Now, one of the other myths is that they are raiding the Social Security Fund and that's why it's going insolvent. No, that's actually not true. There is rules in place. There is legalities that are there that prevents anybody from utilizing the Social Security Fund in that way. That is not why it's going insolvent. Unfortunately, it's a multi-pronged problem that's really happening from, like I said, the birth rates, age of retirees, people in the workforce. It's not actually a Democrat versus Republican problem. Nobody really was responsible for this in any one, particular political party. It's just the realities of the era that we live in. We just live very differently than we did then. And there's just a difference of factors in our culture today that are sort of affecting that. But they did recently, for the Social Security trustees, they released a report saying that it will be insolvent in 8 years and it will require significant cuts to the program. And so some of that might be addressing the age. Nikki Haley had actually mentioned wanting to raise the age during the primaries, but she was lambasted for doing so. Unfortunately, these are just things that we will have to discuss going forward in real ways of how we can address this. And some of that might be privatizing it. It might be phasing it out for certain generations. I know that's a big push for the millennials. We'd like to see that phased out to where we can opt out of the program and be able to take those funds that we normally would have and being given to a current retiree, that we should be able to invest those ourselves and figure out where we would like to put those funds. I mean, given the access to different financial information today through YouTube and different people that offer lessons on financial information, that certainly it's more accessible now today to be able to understand investment and where you can put your funds. They offer a lot more programs with that. Like Schwab has an intelligent portfolio program where it will actually help, determine where you should put some of your money for that. I think people would be obviously a lot better off if they were getting to make some of those decisions for, themselves and their family and their kids.
Yes. And, off air we spoke, I agree. Dave Ramsey calls it social insecurity because like you point out, in 8 years, it's going to be belly up. I'm all for not mandating, but giving people the option to put it in a S&P 500. If the country's going to last, like we said, then why not invest it in the 500 most important companies in the United States? And if the country doesn't last, well, neither will your Social Security. So either way, you're coming out ahead.
Last if the country does. That's the problem.
Exactly. Go ahead, Joey. We need to wrap up here, but go ahead.
Yeah, so the last angle that I was kind of looking at this, and I think it kind of ties the whole project together, because at the end of the day, like, we can talk about any of these things like individual problems, and they are individual problems. But at the end of the day, right, the reason why conservatism matters, at least in my view, is because conservatism is about how do we maintain the whole, right? How do we maintain the best of the past into the future? But it's about a moral vision, right? And so it's not just Social Security on its own, but it's going to boomers, going to our parents and grandparents, and the appeal to them is you need to care about the generations to come after you. And
Hmm.
then the appeal a conservative would say, who says, yes, we do need to cut Social Security, to the younger generations is, you may need to have to give something up, or you may have to do something to help take care of the older generation, right? If the government can't do it,
Mhm.
right? Whereas a lot of times, everyone kind of, when they go to this issue, I feel like they go out of fear, right? So the millennials and like Gen Z, they say that, to feel, well, you've stolen my a chance to retire, or my chance for, to buy a home or whatever. And then the older people say, oh, you're coming after my retirement funds. I worked my whole life. But I feel like a conservative, someone with an actual conservative vision, can say, no, we need to make our society last. We need to care about the older people and the younger people. So it kind of ties it together. But my question, I guess, is, have you had success, or have you noticed any kind of tactics that work best for getting through on this issue? Right? Because it seems to be like one of those things that's like hitting a brick wall sometimes.
Yes, I think a lot of it comes from just having some empathy about who you're talking with in the moment. Like you said, there are things that are concerns and pros and cons for being the younger generation, and there are concerns about moving forward. We're, really in the prime of our lives right now. We're the ones in the workforce. Like I said before, since you don't own your Social Security, those that are currently on retirement, we pay for that currently.
Hmm.
And anything that they put in previously actually was already used by a retiree from the older generation than them. So I think, one, it's kind of breaking up the myth that you own your Social Security and that whatever you're currently getting as a retiree is something that you put into it, when that's not actually true. What you put in was used already by the
Hmm.
prior retirees, and that what you're doing today is being paid for by those of us currently in the workforce. I think, one, breaking that myth and getting people to just understand that would help a lot. I think, two, actually being willing to have the conversation across all generations of what is a viable solution, some way to keep those that are currently in retirement. We certainly are not looking to necessarily kick anybody off of anything. It's not like we're saying we don't want to take care of you, but there certainly should be, before Gen X starts retiring and millennials, now we're at our oldest of 40, years old, like we're starting to think about getting closer to that. We're
Hmm.
potentially 20, 25 years from that. So it's not something that we can just push off to tomorrow. Obviously, we know they're going insolvent in 8 years. It's going to require us to have those hard conversations today. And I think it's approaching it with empathy for both sides of that. How can we protect those that are currently on it to a degree? And how do we make things better going forward for the next couple of generations, knowing that what currently exists is no longer the answer. It just doesn't work in its current form. It needs some changes done to it, whether that's partly privatizing it, whether it's letting people opt out of it, and then, shoring up some things for the people who are currently on it. There's a multitude of ways that we can probably handle this, but it's going to require like a sit down and a long discussion with people coming at it from common sense and some empathy from both sides, being able to say, how do we move this forward so everybody is going to be protected in a way that matters, but knowing that each side is probably going to have to give up something in the end a little bit. We have to come to a compromise, which means somebody has to give a little and somebody's going to take a little. But at the end, there is a way to probably fix this. It's just people don't want to even start to have the conversation because, like you said, Joey, they immediately come at it from fear, worried that now we're going to cut them off, and they really rely on Social Security because maybe they didn't save a ton on their own, when they were younger, and so now they really rely on that. Well, I certainly wouldn't want to cut off somebody's grandmother,
Hmm.
grandfather, and say, well, now you don't have any funds. But at the same time, the younger generations do worry about the fact that many people have just completely written off even being able to retire. Now, that's not the attitude that we should have either, is just knowing that you've also given up your future as well. So I think there's a way to come to the middle on some of this. It requires a strong politician actually coming forward and saying, no, I will not be shut down on this discussion. We need to have it, and we need organizations like the Reagan Caucus, or we need the new Patriot Foundation, or Principles First, or whoever is out there to be able to back that person up and say, yes, this is important. It's a conversation we can't ignore anymore. Let's all be adult about it and talk
Yes.
this through.
Hey,
Mm.
no. I
No,
mean, she's preaching right now, bro. No, that's good. That's passionate because look, I understand. I told you I did a paper on Social Security many years ago, And it's headed. And here we are now after those many years, 8 years from now. Let people know where they can find your organization, and, where do you hang out the most? It seems like that's your X handle. Let people know where they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, definitely. Twitter is definitely the place to go most, just because that's one of the best places to have a conversation. That's where we can often at least hold spaces and therefore have discussions with one another, even, as far away as we might be across the country. It's a great way to be able to come together remotely and talk. Our website is not going to match what we've changed our name to. So we were New Patriot Rebellion. We were trying to be a little bit cheeky in the term. We were trying to reference the founders and being able to rebel against the establishment. But our website is still newpatriotrebellion.com. Our new name, though, is New Patriot Foundation. We have a new site that will be going up in the next few weeks that has a lot more content and information on it. But we are a membership-driven organization. So certainly we're always looking for more people to join and be able to get out there and be conservative activists, primarily in your local community. That's where we put most of our people, and that's where we mobilize from. We really want to get out, the word on that. So you can go to our website, you can sign up, newpatriotrebellion.com. You can find me at my handle here, Cam R. MacKenzie. You can also follow New Patriot Foundation on our X account, which is New Patriot _HQ. You can also search for us on Facebook. We're also on Instagram as well. We always invite you to come have a follow, give us a shout out, leave a comment. We try to handle every comment that we have come in and interact with quite a few people on there. We love hearing people's feedback and their different ideas. We've got a great group of people. We've got members across 24 states right now, with 2 official chapters in both Texas and Florida. We are growing rapidly. And as you can see, it's the right time in a political climate like this. There is a number of people who feel displaced. They feel like they do not fit into the current political parties as they stand. And I totally understand that. Our group of founders felt the same way as well, but that doesn't mean we just give up trying. That's certainly never the answer, is to just give up. It's to fight harder for what you believe in and go out there and make a difference with something. So whether it's joining us, whether it's joining the Reagan Caucus, whatever conservative organization best meets your needs and what you're looking for, I would just say get involved. Getting involved is doing a lot more than just sitting on the sofa and screaming into the void or screaming into Twitter, right? I mean, at least then you're out there doing something with like-minded individuals who also help you feel not alone, because there's a lot of people out here who currently feel displaced by the political parties, but it really gives you a chance to meet with other people. Especially in our group, it gives you fellowship with a lot of other really great people. We do monthly member meetings for everybody. We've got chapter meetings with the official chapters that we've got. We've got like a Slack channel where we all talk with one another. We've got a lot of really great things going on with a number of different committees, including our education committee, who is launching a podcast on July 17th. We've got a Substack that's going up. We're looking to interact with the public more and more. We want to share the different conservative principles and information that's out there and have people feel like they're not so alone. There is common sense to be found here.
Yes.
There is a solution to be found here in what's happening with the political landscape. And I think the more of us join together, and I constantly tell our members this, there's power in numbers. So get involved with people, get involved with an organization. You don't have to be the most active person in the world. You don't always have to go out and door knock and phone bank. I think just having other people to discuss politics with in an environment that you feel like you can share some common values with somebody makes a lot of people just feel a lot better about that, because you don't feel so alone in some of that regard. We're a multi-generational organization. We encompass everything from Gen Z all the way up to boomers. And like I said, we're all across the country in about half the states right now. So yeah, come join us. It's really a great org. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of really good things happening here and what we've got moving forward.
Amen for that. United we stand, divided we fall. So let's gather in, the entire spectrum. Go ahead, Joey.
I feel like after that, the best way to end is to recall some of the words of President Teddy Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who, I'm sorry, I can't read. Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement? And who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while doing greatly, so that his place shall never be with the cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So,
Amen.
you
Amen.
guys are in the
Yes.
arena, and I hope that more of our audience will jump in the arena with you.
Thank you very much for being on the program tonight.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you guys reaching out to me.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure as well. I love learning new things. Hang on while it goes dark for a second.